I'm John Cruden. I was the Assistant Attorney General of the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the Department of Justice for the prosecution of the Volkswagen case, which we called Dieselgate. It was Dieselgate because over 500,000 cars and SUVs were affected by the illegal actions of Volkswagen in violating a number of statutes, including the Clean Air Act. Their violations resulted in emissions sometimes over 40 times the allowable limit, and they did so by software we called defeat devices that hid their emissions. The settlement was a massive settlement. It involved three different elements of the Department of Justice: the Civil Division, the Criminal Division, and the division I led, the Environmental Division. But also there were other agencies. The Environmental Protection Agency was uniquely involved, and so was the California Air Resources Board. Mary Nichols, who led the CARB, was with me in virtually every single negotiating session. But it also involved places like the Customs and Border Protection and the Federal Trade Commission. All of those agencies came together for this monumental, over $20 billion settlement. It started in January of 2016 when we filed our first complaint, and then the third consent decree and plea agreement was filed in January 2017, making it a extremely rapid prosecution in one of the biggest cases ever. But there were not just the federal government's complaint. There were hundreds and hundreds of cases filed at the beginning of the lawsuit, and they were consolidated in a process called multi-district litigation, consolidated in the Northern District of California, which is San Francisco, and then assigned to a really superb judge, Judge Breyer. Judge Breyer had a magistrate judge that oversaw the discovery, but he also chose a settlement master to move settlement along, and that was Robert Mueller, the former FBI director. That process of consolidating the case had enormous benefits. It allowed the use of the Manual for Complex Litigation. It made pleadings go much smoother. It controlled discovery. I would say was overall a complete success. I was leading the negotiations, but simultaneously we were litigating the case in San Francisco. That litigation was led by my great friend and partner, Josh Van Eaton, and he will talk to you next.
Thanks very much, John. The Volkswagen Dieselgate settlement was actually not one single settlement. It was a series of settlements. We negotiated 3 separate civil consent decrees, which contained a total of over 450 pages, so it was quite an undertaking. The scope of the problem, of the violations, required us to break it down into smaller, manageable pieces. And so first, we addressed the 2-liter vehicles. Those were the smaller cars because there was the most of them to deal with, and our priority was to remove the offending vehicles from the road. After that, we focused on the remaining vehicles, the larger engine 3-liter vehicles, and then finally we turned to address the civil penalty under the Clean Air Act and the injunctive relief, which took the form of a suite of corporate reforms that we required Volkswagen to undertake. The combined total value of the 3 settlements was $17.5 billion, and when taken with the criminal fine that was added on top, the entire relief was worth nearly $20 billion. The first aspect of the settlement that we required Volkswagen to undertake was a buyback program. Volkswagen was required to offer to buy back every single vehicle that was illegal that they had sold. We also required Volkswagen to develop a repair program that would attempt to bring the vehicles as close to the certified standard as they could. But because they were unable to reach that standard, they were required to offer to buy back the vehicles. Second, Volkswagen was required to invest $2 billion over a 10-year period into zero-emission vehicle infrastructure and education. Because they sold cars and marketed them as green vehicles, but they actually were not, that skewed the vehicle market for vehicles that were actually green and caused owners to buy these vehicles. Third, the settlement required Volkswagen to pay over $3 billion worth of mitigation. And mitigation in an environmental case is making the environment whole, just like in a criminal case, restitution is making the victim whole. In order to do this, we required them to place billions of dollars into a trust fund available to states and tribes who could access the money to do projects that would reduce diesel air emissions within their states and tribal areas. Every single state and a number of eligible tribes applied for and were granted beneficiary status under the trust. And you don't often see all 50 states agree on one thing, but they all agreed that this pot of money was worth accessing, and they've done so. It's been a very successful part of the settlement. Lastly, Volkswagen was required to pay a civil penalty under the Clean Air Act. They paid $1.45 billion worth, which is the largest civil penalty ever under the Clean Air Act. In addition to the penalty, the settlement imposed a number of corporate reform obligations on Volkswagen. They had to enhance their whistleblower system, separate the design and the production functions, and devote a whole section of their company to adherence with United States law, notwithstanding the fact that the company is headquartered in Germany.